Fabio Cardone's research group. He's a physics professor, experimental physics, and he has a new paper out with two of his colleagues on how his acoustic cavitation sonotrode transmutations and also a Helmholtz coil experiment that they did demonstrate a larger violation of Lorentz invariance. Normally, Lorentz invariance is just considered, or Lorentz violation. It's normally assumed that the symmetry is just violated by a local symmetry breaking of space-time. And what he's showing is that the experiments he did with emitting neutrons from the sonotrode ultrasound cavitation onto a steel tube, and then the Helmholtz experiment, they both show this anomalous energy creation as a type of cold fusion, or just increased output of energy, electromagnetic energy. And so he's saying that the implications of this Lorentz violation is that the universe is inherently asymmetric, and that the asymmetry of the cosmic background radiation is another example of this. So it's 3 case studies that he discusses, proving that the asymmetry is not just a local violation of Lorentz invariance, the Lorentz symmetry of spacetime, that spacetime is inherently asymmetric. And so I sent him Alon Khan's talk, where Alon Khan also talks about the cosmic background radiation being another example of the inherent noncommutative process to infinity. That's also non-local. So in other words, there's no need to postulate symmetry breaking, because any kind of symmetry is actually a limited case, with the classical physics being just a limited, in the end, a failed model, whereas the truth of reality is this asymmetric flow of time. So the Alon Khan's, he just says it's an infinity of infinite degrees of freedom as a periodic, rhythmic movement. It's constantly moving. And this means the future and the past are constantly overlapping. And Basil J. Hiley, he discusses this as well. He says that the Feynman renormalization was an error that covered up the quantum potential that is actually this overlap of the future and the past. So when we think there's a particle on a sub-observable level, there is this flow of time that creates an anomalous energy that is also a anti-gravity energy, a gravitational propulsion. And this is what the weak measurements have documented with photons. But the problem with photons is they don't have a rest mass. And so it's hard to apply them to space-time directly, with gravitational mass, even though it's implied when you realize that the photon energy is from the momentum, and the momentum is from the frequency, and the frequency is noncommutative with the time. And so I just got a response this morning from Professor Rob Flack. He goes by Rob, and he is the experimental physicist working with Basil J. Hiley. And I was just wondering, because they're going to test argon in the weak measurements in terms of noncommutativity, because argon has a rest mass. But he said that their lab had been shut down because of COVID, because of the pandemic. And so now they're back at it, doing their experimental testing. And so I just thanked him for that clarification, because I was just wondering what had happened. And it's just nice to see that. I had written about Fabio Cardone before, because he uses this device he created called a sonotrode. I think it's 15 watts, or it's either 25 watts, but it's ultrasound. And the interesting thing about it is the acoustic cavitation doesn't need water, because normally people think, you got to have a bubble that collapses. But the ultrasound, it creates this acoustic cavitation in steel also. And it has to do with the micron wavelength. So there's essentially, it must be creating like a metamaterial, a negative refractive effect in the steel. And Professor Fabio Cardone, he has a book on what he calls deformed spacetime, or spacetime deformations. So he's basically arguing that there's this what they call a evanescent wave, which is the classical term for this potential energy that's superluminal, as a negative kinetic energy. It turns into a negative kinetic energy. So he's basically saying that it's bending space-time. So it's basically like a wormhole. And I don't know how well his experiments have been replicated. I'm sure people have tried to critique him, but I'm just really glad to see that he's realized the explanation for why he's able to document the emission of neutrons, or the creation of increased energy. This is all in the context of quantum field theory, claiming that virtual photons do not exist, that they're just a mathematical fiction, when the dynamical Casimir effect has already proven that you're amplifying virtual photons into real photons. And this is also done by Sir John Pendry with the Archimedes screw, or Archimedes spiral. Yeah, Archimedes screw. It's a circulation of light back into itself. And so then you can see how this is the secret of meditation, because literally when we meditate, our brain is like a sonotrode. The pressure, the piezoelectric pressure of the collagen in the brain is creating the ultrasound, which then causes this acoustic cavitation as a metamaterial with the tubulin and the microtubules. And then when we open our eyes, we're emitting biophotons. And most people, they don't realize this, of course, but science has proven this is true. You emit biophotons out of your eyes. And then when you meditate, so that takes 2/3 of your brain's energy, and the brain's 25 watts. And the biophotons are a laser coherent energy, a signal. So when you close your eyes and you visualize light, and you do that in a rhythmic fashion, then you're self-amplifying this secret gravitational mass of light that originates from the virtual photons, from the negative frequency and time reversed signal. And Sir John Pendry, this is the basis for his Archimedes screw light experiment. He's able to create photons from virtual photons, and he says it violates the conservation of momentum due to this negative frequency. And he's very explicit. It's like, once you're dealing with negative frequencies, then very strange things can happen. And so the other key aspect is the Bell inequality experiments that disproved Einstein have also disproved quantum field theory. But the quantum field theorists, of course, try to ignore this. And so the problem is that, it's claimed you can only have a signal based on the amplitude. And so you have to square the amplitude to get the signal. But the key point that physicist Günther Nimps demonstrated when he transmitted Mozart at a superluminal speed is that the signal is actually the inverse of the frequency as a phase shift in time. And when you rely on the phase shift of time as the signal from the inverse of the frequency, so it's basically like a negative frequency. And that's a time reverse signal. And that's the whole secret, is if you're just relying on frequency and time, then you're able to bypass the limitation of relativity. And this is the secret of meditation that leads to then anti-gravity and levitation if you take meditation to a deep enough level. And it's all because of the mathematics, because the language of science is mathematics, and the mathematics has assumed a commutative geometry as symmetry. And there's a good book that I cited in my master's thesis over 20 years ago called From Pythagoras to Einstein. It's by a German writer, physicist, I guess. And basically you can, it's well known in that special relativity is just a extension of the symmetric mathematics, the logic of the Pythagorean theorem. And so it all depends on how you define an observer in general relativity, because the claim by the quantum field theorists is that if you're creating photons from virtual photons, that's just observer relative. This is what Victor T. Toth said to me, and he's self-taught, but he's considered an expert on the internet. So he cited half a dozen textbooks on quantum field theory, and I pointed out that Alain Kahn dismisses quantum field theory. And so Basil J. Hiley and Alain Kahn, they point out that the noncommutativity is the secret to quantum gravity, that noncommutativity enables quantum gravity because you're able to combine the discrete with the continuous. And that's what you need to be able to do. There's that basic logical error between the discrete and the continuous that math professor Luigi Borzacchini calls the deep pre-established disharmony. That's the guiding evolutive principle of science. So all this obsession over technology, with the AI stuff and whatever latest military gadgets are, that's all an extension of the symmetric mathematics that is the structural drive of the science as technology. And so when you rely on non-commutativity, you're dealing with these what are typically called sub-observables. But as Pascual Jordan emphasized in the 1930s, because he was the first to realize this from Heisenberg's discovery in the transition frequencies, the Ritz-Rydberg combination in the spectrum analysis spectroscopy. There, I said it. That the non-commutativity can self-amplify into the macro scale. And the key part of this is that it's still non-local. So the non-locality is inherently basically a macro Heisenberg effect. So the observer relative limitation to relativity based on the rest frame and the speed of light invariance is actually not the truth of reality, but rather a byproduct of our dependence on external measurements that are limited to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle of position and momentum. But if you're able to practice the truth of reality is, as documented in these weak measurement experiments and the deformation of space-time that violates the Lorentz symmetry, and as shown by Fabio Cardone's research group. So this indicates that there's these evanescent waves as the quantum potential that's noncommutative. That Richard Feynman overlooked by trying to do his renormalization trick, and Dirac overlooked it because Dirac was obsessed with symmetric mathematics. So he was favoring the mathematics over the actual physics, the truth in the physics, the non-commutativity from Heisenberg. I mean, he realized it was non-commutative, but he tried to cover it up. And then Moyal was more honest about it, as Hiley describes it. And then you don't have to use any wave function. You don't even have to use any probabilities. And you're able to explain all the paradoxes of quantum physics, of non-locality, when you understand that the future is acting on the past, that there's this second level of time. And Louis de Broglie, he just logically inferred this when he used the quantum photon to critique relativity. So he just said, a particle goes up in frequency as it goes towards the speed of light based on quantum momentum, but the particle also slows down in time, which means the time gets bigger. And based on Pythagorean music theory, that you can't have that the frequency has to be inverse to time. So therefore, there is a negative frequency and time reverse signal that's guiding the particle non-locally. But Basil J. Hiley's big point is that this guidance does not take place in a materialistic medium. It doesn't even take place in space-time as a medium. It is pre-space. So it's just pure time. And the irony is that mainstream physics tries to discount time, literally says time doesn't exist. And so time is the ultimate externalization of science. And this goes back to Plato stating time is the image of eternity, because time is not an image. You cannot see it. And that's why it's called a sub-observable in the weak measurement experiments. And so you're literally changing the past based on the future measurements. And vice versa, you can have a precognitive, pre-selection, what they call. And the irony is that Olivier Cosse-de-Beauregard, he talked about this already. He said, that precognition is inherent to quantum physics. But he argued the opposite claim, that it's due to the invariance of time in, the Lorentz invariance that forces the future to act on the past as much as the past to act on the future in quantum physics. And then he says that it's only when you make the measurement that you get this non-commutativity, or, as an asymmetric, the asymmetry of time, where you have the passing of time as a linear entropy, a forward direction of time. But and then Olivier Cosse-de-Beauregard was the first to recommend this delayed choice eraser experiment that then proved that the future can change the past. So he was assuming that the the paranormal or spiritual abilities are then limited in science due to the collapse of the wave function. But Fabio Cardone's big point is that if you have this inherent asymmetry to reality, then you can create these macro scale anomalies that disprove the standard symmetry model of physics. And so the other thing that Fabio Cardone emphasizes is that this disproves the Copernicus principle that, the Earth goes around the sun. And so the Earth doesn't have any favored position in the universe. But what he's saying is that actually we have this inherent asymmetric perspective in the universe. And if you think about it, this is Roger Penrose makes this same emphasis that time is inherently asymmetric, and that this explains the secret of life, why there's life on Earth, is because the negative entropy is from this time-reversed negative frequency that he says is the basis of the gravitational potential that powers the sun, and also is the secret of what's called dark energy of the universe. And it is what will remain after, it causes the accelerated expansion of the universe, but it also is what creates the next Big Bang. So it's what exists eternally and is the basis of life on Earth. And so because our science has been based on symmetry up till now, the symmetric mathematics, all of our technology has increased the entropy of gravity on Earth by trying to decrease the entropy of matter. Since matter is actually inherently made of light, therefore it actually originates from the secret gravitational mass of light. That's from this virtual photons with the time-reversed negative frequency that's noncommutative and sub-observable. And so that's why we face biological annihilation on Earth as an acceleration of space-time itself through the increased development of technology. And the scientists, they don't learn non-commutative mathematics. So because all their mathematics is wrong, therefore their technology is wrong also. And our whole sense of linear time and progress is inherently destructive of life on Earth. Of course, humans were not always like this, but that's why we also had to destroy all the other cultures on Earth and spread Platonic philosophy as science based on the symmetric mathematics. And so that's about it. I'm going to leave it right there. And I'm glad that Fabio Cardone has figured it out. He doesn't call it non-commutativity, he just calls it asymmetry. That asymmetry is the truth of reality.